Did you know the longest known living terrarium belongs to a guy named David Latimer, and it's been growing for over 60 years unopened? That's pretty incredible. This terrarium I originally made back in June of 2023, so it is officially 2 years old. And in this video, I'll show you all the updates that I've made to the terrarium in that 2 years. I put 2 cuttings into this terrarium when I made it. The first one is this white tiger Fittonia, and I just took a little cutting and then stripped off the lower leaves. And I placed that into the soil to root. And the other cutting was a string of frogs. And again, I just pushed that into the soil to root. I finished up by adding a couple drops of distilled water. The driftwood was actually sticking out a little far, so I had to push that in to make room for the cork top. And the next time I saw this terrarium, it was 8 months later for the 8-month update. As you can see, this terrarium is not doing great. I actually had it tucked behind something on my shelf and completely forgot about it. I removed the dead moss, then cut back the Fittonia, and I then took a cutting of the Fittonia to place it back into the terrarium. And with the end of a skewer stick, I carefully maneuvered it into the moss. I also removed any of the dead and dying leaves, and then I replaced the patch of dead moss with new moss. I had found these crystals a while back at the thrift shop, and the crystal girlies told me that it's a clear quartz crystal and it brings good vibes. And I thought this terrarium definitely needs that, as well as some distilled water. So I added that, and I vowed to keep a closer eye on it and check back in 2 months for a 10-month update. The crystals were definitely doing their job because this terrarium is a lot happier. And after you wipe away the condensation, you can see that there's a lot of new growth. There's growth in the moss. There's also growth in the original Fittonia, as well as the cutting that we put back in. Here you can see that the roots are actually reaching into the drainage layer, and there's new growth on the string of frogs. There is a dying leaf, and I'll go ahead and just remove that. And then I'll make a cutting of the string of frogs. And when you take a look at the cutting, you can see that it has these aerial roots. And that's actually where it's going to root from when you put it back into the terrarium. So I'll go ahead and put that into the terrarium, and that'll help the string of frogs fill out a little more. And I'm going to take another cutting of the Fittonia because it's a little leggy. And if you take a look at it, you could use this for a different project, or in my case, I'm going to put it back into the terrarium. And again, I'll just tuck that into the moss so that it'll root. You probably also notice that the driftwood has begun to darken and deteriorate, and that's just a natural process inside of a terrarium for wood, and as that breaks down, it'll continue to feed the plants that are inside the terrarium. And then I check back in 2 months for the 1-year update. On its 1-year birthday, this terrarium is thriving, and at this point, I really could just set it and forget it and let the terrarium fill in and go through its natural life cycle, and it would probably be just fine. But that's not really my aesthetic, so I'll cut it back and continue to do updates. But you can definitely keep your terrarium all natural if that is the vibe that you're going for. After cutting back the Fittonia again and then placing those cuttings back into the terrarium, I'll go ahead and put the cork back in and let this baby sit for another 6 months, and I checked back in on it for its 1.5-year update. The condensation on the side of the terrarium is a sign of a really healthy terrarium, and I would leave it, except for I want to show you what's going on the inside. So I'll wipe that back so we can see what's happening. There's a lot of new growth. So all of those cuttings that I've made continue to grow. You can see the moss is starting to grow over the crystals. And the string of frogs has absolutely exploded. There are a couple leaves that are dying and need to be removed, but that's pretty typical. And I'll start by cutting back the Fittonia. And when you take a look at it, this is a perfectly good plant that you could use for a different project, or you can add it back in like I'm doing here. But first, I'll go ahead and finish trimming back the Fittonia. And then I'll remove any of the dead leaves. And I will cut back this string of frogs just to give some more space back to the terrarium, since I'm not going to touch it after this update for a while. And again, any leaves that don't look great, I'll go ahead and take those out. And then using the end of my skewer stick, I'll go ahead and tamp the moss down just so that it's not overtaking the other plants. And then that cutting that I took earlier of the Fittonia, I'll cut that back and add that back into the terrarium, tucking it into the moss. I won't water it right now, but if it looks dry in the next 6 months, I will water it. Otherwise, I just checked back in on it for its 2-year update. 2 years really is quite the milestone when it comes to a terrarium. And there's so much new growth in here over the last 6 months. And when you take a look inside, it is filling up. Now, again, you could leave this and just let it fill the entire container. I prefer to cut it back for aesthetic purposes, and whether you're planting those cuttings back into the terrarium or using them for other projects, they don't need to go to waste. It's kind of wild, like we started with just one cutting of Fittonia, and now look at all the different cuttings. And the moss is really reaching for the sky here. And you can see the root systems growing into the drainage layer. I'm going to go ahead and tamp that moss back down just so it's not blocking the light for any of the plants. I will go ahead and cut back all of the leggy Fittonia again, but when you take a look at it, this really would be perfect for a miniature terrarium project. And there's a couple dead leaves that I'll go ahead and remove. And I will be cutting back the string of frogs again to give it some more shape. And I'll actually take one of the cuttings and put that back into the terrarium. I'll go ahead and add a couple drops of distilled water before I replace the cork top to help hold in the humidity so this terrarium can continue to thrive. Let me know when we should check back in on this terrarium, and hopefully it'll be around for another 60 years.